what I always get like not caught up on, but where I kind of want to make sure that I play my own devil's advocate is when I say what you just said, where it's like, hey, I don't want to see people, so caught up in, the level of adduction of their arm to bias the costal pec on, or the clavicular pec on a dumbbell press, that they then don't either enjoy their training as much because they're so focused on whether or not I'm doing this right, or it comes at the cost of the bigger rocks, just like effort, consistency, total number of hard sets and consistency over time and all of that stuff. The problem is that is technically a false dichotomy. Technically, it doesn't need to be either or. And that's like where I'm like playing my own devil's advocate, because you could do both. I mean, I can hear people already, I won't name names, people that were like, okay, just because you need to, just because that this exercise can, or this execution pattern can help bias this muscle, doesn't mean you can't train hard. In fact, that might actually help you. Okay, I hear it. Theoretically, it's a false dichotomy, but in practice, I see it actually play out that way quite often. And I see it play out, and you can tell me if this is also what you see in the enjoyment category, which has a knock-on effect to consistency, where it's not that people then go in the gym and they don't train hard. It's that they going into the gym and there's so much second guessing of, I put it on social media and all of a sudden I have all these people critiquing it. Oh, my arm should be a little bit tucked, a little bit this. And all of a sudden it becomes not fun because the feeling of competency is not there, because it's like such uncertainty of if I'm doing this right. And that can actually affect consistency and a knock-on effect of like, well, I just don't enjoy this as much as I used to. And maybe over the long term, things fall out. Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, I think so. I agree. It doesn't have to be either or. I just try to think of reality and like how people actually behave. And I hate to be the guy where it's just like, well, look at all the big guys in the gym, because I understand obviously that's flawed for a lot of reasons. But I can think of plenty of people who have this obsession with doing it a certain way. I mean, there was this guy in college who was like this quintessential character, and it was just always about how to do this perfectly. And he even, this was like well before all this stuff was as popular, and he would put out these videos on this, and it just, he didn't have an impressive physique, but more importantly, like he wasn't replicating results in many people. And I just think, for most people, I tend to stick to the basics. And I know that can sound so cliche, but at least until a certain point. Because again, like how many, like you got a pretty big following on Instagram, right? 25,000 or something like that. Like how many of those people are really at an advanced level that need to focus on it? Now, I think for you and me, I don't know, how long have you been lifting?
10, 12 years.
Okay. So, at the 10+ year mark, I do think, one, I think it can matter, but two, I think it also keeps it more exciting to try things. Sometimes like Brian and Abel will start going, and I'm usually very talkative in that group, and then they'll start talking to me about how to like get this specific fiber of the lat, and I just kind of zone out. I'm just like, all right, guys, like have fun with that.
Yeah. And you, at this point, I find it, the way I would describe my relationship with this new information as it comes out is intellectually stimulating, and almost like full stop after that. Not because it lacks applicability entirely. It doesn't. It totally doesn't. But I'm definitely somebody who gets like really excited about, I don't know, I'll go through waves of things that I'm really excited about learning about, and then I'll go take a million courses and I get really excited about it. And every time I scroll through like old content of myself, I'm like, yep, this was my this phase. This was my like crazy reverse dieting phase where I'm like all up in the research with Trexler. And that was a couple months ago. We're like really excited about debunking this stuff and having these debates and stuff. And then if I go back like 2 years, a year or two, it's all of these like costal pec this and, long head, short head, bicep that. And I'm, again, not irrelevant, but I just catch myself like during moments where I go in waves. So I'm really excited about it. But what's cool is ends up happening is like you go into the extreme, you get really, you're like totally drinking the Kool-Aid, and then you can step out and you can kind of be like, all right, like I went all in on this thing. What sorts of differences was I feeling? What sort of difference did this make for my clients? And I can come with a little bit more of a nuanced approach at the end. And one of the things that I find frustrating is I don't mind if we talk about this stuff on social media. I don't mind if someone's like, hey, this is how you work the long head, short head. I've had Ben Yanes on the podcast, Ben Giannis on the podcast. And, he's like, social media strategy is like ultimate polarization. Like totally, this doesn't work, that you can't do this. If you do the tricep rope push down, like your elbow's going to fall off your body. And I find the one thing that I get bothered by is a lack, I'm not picking on his content. I just mean this general discussion of like, is a lack of like, at the end of everything you say, I need you to tell me and your following and everyone else listening where this falls in the hierarchy of importance. Like, it's cool for us to talk about it, but please put an annotation somewhere of like, this is in the fucking 0.001% of stuff that's important after all of this stuff. And the problem is that makes your content seem less important. And so nobody does that. And so it's just like, hey, if somebody comes at me in the comments and they're like, well, this is more important, they might be like, yeah, you're probably right, but it's never upfront. And so nobody's figuring out, nobody has this picture of the hierarchy in front of them. And so they just like don't know what is most important. This is one thing that bothers me.
Yeah, well, I'm smirking because you're preaching to the choir, because it's just something I talk about all the time, and it's if you listen to the podcast, you probably heard me bring this up with respect to genetics, but it's like I'm not expecting people to every time they put out content say, asterisk, by the way, the reason that I have 30 pounds more muscle than almost everybody else is because I have superior genetics, right? Like I don't expect them to keep saying that, but it's like I harp on it because it's like that is the difference between this person and you. Your perfectly done execution is not the difference between 30 pounds of muscle. It's probably not even the difference between 5 pounds of muscle. I mean, even Brian has said that if he I mean, I don't know if I agree even to this extent, but he said that if he had just focused on progressive overload and just did max OT from college to now, there'd probably be a difference in like injuries and whatnot. But just from a total size standpoint, he'd be at 99% the same level. And I think it's probably close to that. I think whatever, maybe it's 95, 98, whatever percent it is, it's close enough. And I think that, as you mentioned, social media, it's so polarizing, and it's so, you're only going to get that way. But I feel embarrassed for some of these people who are like 40-plus-year-old content creators, and they're doing these silly TikToks and everything. It's like, yeah, but that's what works, I guess. Right. I mean, the whole thing is just not like my type of stuff. So I understand that I would just never have this massive following because I'm not a very polarizing person.
The more I think about like, okay, so if we're talking about like overarching discussion here of like improving exercise execution based on what you want to work from a however granular you want to get, muscle division of a muscle, etc. How important is that? I actually think that I want to talk about this. Like, I know Brian is coming out with a podcast on his about just like his more like nihilism that he's been feeling lately. And I find that to be like such a fun, interesting discussion. This idea that I guess we'll go into today, because I've heard all of you guys talk about this a little bit of like, do we all just end up at the same place anyway? And the two things I would say when the exercise execution and exercise selection based on maybe muscle fiber or muscle division accuracy, where it becomes a little bit more important to me, I think, is injury prevention from an orthopedic perspective. Maybe there's like certain exercises that, again, maybe that we're blurring like exercise selection from like ability to precisely hit certain fibers, but whatever, this booming of different exercise selection and execution and biomechanics, we'll just bucket all of that. Is from an injury prevention standpoint, because like you said, max OT, like maybe you're just like, my elbows are fucked after, like all this barbell work, a little bit higher volume, whatever. But between that and, again, injury prevention. So to me, it's like if you're flexing a little bit lower volume approach, I think, okay, if I'm going to do less stuff, then exercise selection as a general like bucket becomes more important. And then also from an injury prevention sort of side of things, if I'm going to be lifting for the next 20 years, then I really need to focus in on this. But being so precise on it, yeah, sure, I think that maybe we take it a little far. But those are the two contexts as I come into the period of my life where I'm definitely going to train with less volume and I want to spend less time in the gym. And so if I'm bringing time down, then efficiency has to come up, and exercise selection might be one of those things that I look just a little bit closer at. Does it change a ton? Maybe not. I don't know. Is that something that, how's your approach to like how much volume and time I want to spend in the gym, and how much other stuff becomes important? Has that changed?
Yeah, so and this is where I think it's hard, because I think ego plays a part a little bit. So if you were the gym guy and that was kind of your identity, so you're maybe familiar with my calf experiment. So for people who don't know, for the last probably actually close to 3 years now, maybe 2.5 years, I have only trained my right calf. So I've done no left calf training. And this has ranged from 3 sets per week up to 20 sets per week. And everybody's got their little BS calf secret. You got to stretch and you got to contract and all this, right? And they are to the 16th of an inch, exactly the same size, no difference whatsoever. And you know, I do some basic cardio. I train my legs otherwise. So you could say, oh, that's maintaining the size. So it's like, if that's all it takes, then what are we even doing here, right? Why are you even training then? If you could just bike, you know, a few miles and maintain your leg size. So